want to talk a little bit about how you write a news story. And there's a lot of different styles. For this class, the main style we want to talk about is the inverted pyramid because that's sort of the bread and butter of news writing. Um, it's kind of the traditional style. And so an inverted pyramid is the idea, like a pyramid is a triangle. And so if you invert it, then you're, flipping it upside down. So the triangle is, kind of there. But then the top, the base of the triangle is at the top or the base of the pyramid. So if you think about one of the pyramids, the idea there that the widest part is actually at the top. And so the idea is like if you were building a pyramid, you would want the strongest stuff at the bottom. But in a news writing, we want the strongest stuff at the top. And then as you go down, you get less and less strong, less and less interesting, less and less, detailed. Maybe you start off like somebody was killed. Next thing, maybe you tell us who it was. The next thing you tell us where it happened and why, the who, what, when, where, why. And then maybe you give us details about how they were killed. And then you give details about, uh, you know, um, the family of the person. Maybe you give details about the person, who their suspects are, or the police investigation, things like that. And as you get down, it's less and less important, right? I mean, if somebody gets killed, you kind of want to know, like, where did they get killed? Who killed them? You want those basic facts. Maybe you want to know about who the person was that got killed. You might want to know if they found the suspect. That's pretty important. But then, like, the idea of, like, how it happened, that's of some importance. But, as you get down, like, the family's reaction, the loss of a child, those aren't nearly as important. The things that most people want to know is who got killed, why, when, where, how, those types of things. And so the idea there is, and this also comes into an idea we'll talk about later of news judgment. I mean, what you consider the most important facts may be different than other people, although there is probably some, most people would probably agree on those 5 W's or whatever as the most important facts. Now, the reason why the inverted pyramid got invented, or the reason from where it came, was back during really kind of newspapers they had their heyday probably in the 1800s. Up through about the 1970s or 80s. Maybe 50s they began to go down as radio and TV in its infancy was beginning to erode it. But there was no internet or anything, and so that kind of newspaper style, that written form instead of a vocalized or spoken form that comes in radio or other things, but that style that you get also in websites and everything kind of had their biggest period. Most people got their news in a printed form, and that was during probably the really kind of was coming in the United States in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and by the Civil War it was beginning to really ramp up. It was probably in the early 1900s that they kind of hit their peak, but now I'm giving you just way too much information on times. But the case is that during the Civil War, they began to, the way they would relay stories is, there'd be a battle report, there'd be a battle thing for the Civil War or something like that. There'd be these things going on. And so they would want to report back, and they would put it in a newspaper. And the way they would get the news there was they would run a telegraph line. And these would run alongside train tracks, and they would run it alongside, through the countryside or wherever. And during like the early periods, even like, if you were trying to send a wire from California back to New York, the problem is that, you've got basically, you have one wire, and you've got to relay it from here to, maybe from San Francisco, you've got to relay it to Salt Lake City, and Salt Lake City, maybe you have to make it all the way to Denver, and you get Denver, then you relay to St. Louis, and St. Louis on to like Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh on to New York, and there'd be people relaying it along the way. Well, the problem is you may send the message on that first leg, and maybe halfway down that leg, the wire breaks. There's a tree that falls over, a windstorm in Idaho or something, and it causes the wire to break. Well, what happens is the story doesn't get through, but that's only if it, that's the first leg. You've got like 6, 7, maybe 12, 20 legs to get the stuff. And then during the Civil War, this may have even been a bigger issue where, in order to stop the enemy from being able to relay messages, requesting backup, requesting reinforcements. I think they call it backup, reinforcements. things like that, they would, the opposing army would cut the lines, perhaps, or perhaps there would just be a bomb or something, or a cannonball that would explode near the site, and it would just break, or there could be a windstorm or whatever, right? And so the idea there is that the wire oftentimes wouldn't get the message through. And so the case is that as a result of that, what happened is there was the idea that, if you're going to get a story, you don't want to start off your story with it was warm, it was dark, the sky was, you don't want kind of a narrative format. You want to get to the point very quickly. And so this is kind of why, especially with hard news, you want to get to the point right away. With softer news, you wouldn't have had to write in that format, because you could have sent that via mail or something, and they could print it, or you could have waited, and if it wasn't a complete story, you could have just not worried about it, because it would have been maybe still good in a couple of days when the wire would be back up and you could get the message through. But if you were trying to send this message, something that was breaking news, like, a battle has ensued and 30,000 people are dead, you want to make sure as much of the news gets through as possible. And so you would start off with kind of that, basically, that most important news first. 30,000 people were killed today in a battle to try to reclaim New Orleans, or something like that. The Union Army, came and finally defeated the other. You want to kind of hit those key facts. I mean, you want to know the number of dead, you want to know who won, you want to know if the battle is still ongoing, and then you want to get down more into the day-to-day, and maybe even a narrative about how the battle unfolded and things like that. But if the wire breaks after you've sent 4 paragraphs, you still can get the message through. This could also come through like with a fax machine, if you guys remember that, or something else. I mean, most of the time now, everything's kind of encapsulated in one box, and it just goes through as a whole thing. But back in the, even like a fax machine, it was like, you'd send the first page, and it would print the page, and if the fax broke off in the middle, you wouldn't get the whole entire fax. And so what happens is the same thing, was back then. The message may not have made it all the way through. And so the idea there was that if you were going to send a message, you wanted to get as much of the message. And so what happens is they create this inverted pyramid. And the inverted pyramid is basically just this idea that you start with the most important information, then less, and you work your way down. And so basically, when you're writing in that format, you want to kind of order your facts, not so much based upon, you want them to fit together, you want it to be in a logical order, but you need to put a big emphasis on what is most important. And this is also important even to this day. Now, with online websites and things, there's a couple different things. I mean, first of all, if you pick up your phone and you decide to start reading a story here, and you pick it up and you say, I'm going to read it. Well, you get a little bit on it, you scan down a little ways, and you get down like a few paragraphs. People get bored, right? They go, I don't want to read this narrative. I don't want to read, I'm busy. I can flip to the next thing as quick as anything, right? I'm on a page and I can just flip back and, keep scanning. And so the case is that, if you aren't giving people the facts, if you're not giving them interesting things, then they're going to flip back. And especially with hard news, with actual factual news reporting, you have to be able to keep giving them information. Because the reality is now, I don't know anymore with like online, but used to be the number of people who actually read from the beginning of a story to the end was probably in the, it was, if you took everybody who picked up like a newspaper, everybody who saw a story, the number of people who would read, like they read the first paragraph, how many of them would finish? And the numbers were like 5%, 10%. Is not a very high percent. Now, in a good story, a story with lots of facts and well written, you might get 20, 30, 40%. But in stories, oftentimes, you get, you don't get a completion rate. People read 3 or 4 paragraphs, and I think most of us, if we are honest or think about how we read things, oftentimes we scan down and we're, on, Facebook, and it says, oh, here's a news story about, I don't know, here somebody posted something about something in the Orthodox Church, okay, and it's a story about a bishop or something, okay, and I just scanning down this. I don't know why I have to actually look at that. I could make something up, but maybe I say, okay, I want to read that. I read 2 or 3 paragraphs, decide I'm not that interested in it. I flip back and I'm on to the next thing, right? And this is kind of the way that most of us approach, if we're reading a newspaper, if we're reading a magazine, if we're reading other things, you maybe go, oh, that sounds interesting. You read a few paragraphs, you're like, yeah, I'm not that interested. I'm not connecting. And so the case is the other thing is especially with news, is people who are trying to get the news are trying to get the key facts. They want the key ideas. Maybe they're not even interested in a big way. They just kind of want to know the key ideas. And so what happens is you kind of need to give it to them. Your job is to condense the information and give it to them. And then everybody's going to want to read your story. And so you give it to them, most important, less important, less important, less important. And you kind of want to structure it with some quotes and some facts and weave stuff together so it's interesting. But that's the basic format. The inverted pyramid is sort of the classic example. And the idea there is you start with the most important and work your way down. That way, if people don't read the entire story, you can just do it. You can just, they still get the key facts. They still know what the story is. This is also important with print media, although, like, for example, I already told you, most people are moving to a digital format, and that people self-select. But when you work in like a newspaper, there's only so much space, and so you say you want to have a story like there's a shooting here, and there's a fire in this town, and a bombing in this town, and something else, right? Well, you need all those stories, but maybe each of the reporters wrote enough that you could only fit one of those stories in, but you want to get all 4 stories because you think your readers want to know about all 4 things. Well, then what the editor is going to do is they're going to cut the story from you're busy, right? You want the key facts and you want to cut it quickly. You don't want to have to go up and go, okay, where's the most important fact? I'll move that up and I'll move this up and I'll rewrite it. No, they just cut from the bottom, right? You got about space for about 5 or 6 inches. You have room for 200 to 300 words, 400 words. You just throw the first 300 to 400 words in and you cut wherever it makes sense. And so, if you have editors who are going to do that, then you also have to write with that in mind. You want to get the key information, especially in hard news. Now, in feature writing and other things, that rule can be kind of thrown out, but at least that's the key of what you want to do.